My name is Rima, and I've just recently graduated with my Part 1 certificate.
My name is David McDougall. I'm from Scotland and I'm an architect. I'm Martin Glover, and I qualified as an architect in 2001. I remember back when I was a school student, must have been 15 or 16, a teacher asked me what I'd like to do one day for a job. And I looked in this booklet and I found some information about landscape architecture. I was confident. I thought, yeah, this is the career for me. I want to do that. And the teacher's response was, well, you're deaf, so you can't talk well in a group setting. You're good, you're talented, but don't forget there are a lot of meetings in landscape architecture. It's not the career for you. So I believed that, and I ended up becoming an architectural technician. I was always good at art and graphics and things like that, and people used to tell me that I should try and become an artist, but I ended up going to college to study product design, and then after a while realising it didn't really challenge me enough. And when I discovered architecture as an option, it appealed to me because it felt like it was a good opportunity to build on, a good career to grow within. It felt like there was more involvement there than just working in art. So yeah, that's how me and architecture started. My experience at university, I think it initially started when I was studying at college. So what was that, around 3 years of studying at college? I knew then, that early on, that I couldn't be a full-time university student. I wouldn't survive it. It's impossible. And luckily, I was offered the opportunity to study part-time. So that actually increased my confidence. I could work 4 days per week and I could study 1 day per week. I knew it would be difficult, but I felt like I could manage 1 day per week. Of course, it was always a struggle throughout the whole time, but I think for me, probably the most important thing was just knowing how to design things, understanding design, being able to analyse, learning how to solve problems, using my initiative, being creative, using the things that I learnt at work to then inform my studies, and it allowed me to develop.
After 2 years of studying at university, I remember having consistent barriers. The most significant barrier were interpreters. My regular interpreters were lovely, we got on really well, worked well in teams, they knew about architectural jargon as I provided them the slides to learn. There's an Instagram account called Sidestrokes which posts signs and words and helped interpreters and was very useful. In my presentations, I would use these architectural knowledge and the interpreter would voice it over, but when those interpreters weren't there, I'd have new interpreters and they knew nothing about architectural science. Communication was really difficult and the wrong information was given from my presentations.
When I then went on to do my part 2, it was possible, it was doable. I mean, I had to fight for my right to have an interpreter. I had to be very clear about that, but unfortunately, I didn't have regular interpreters at the time, which is disappointing, obviously. I mean, now, looking back on that time, I just wish everything was set up perfectly from the first day, which would have enabled me to progress and learn quicker. I mean, there were still barriers when I got to university with things like interpreters. I mean, I was lucky to be a part of a good group of students, but ultimately I was the only deaf student. So people on the course accepted me. That wasn't the issue. Of course they did. It was more a case of them adjusting to try and meet my needs, especially with things like exams, presentations. Obviously I needed interpreters for written exams and all types of stuff. I'm not just deaf, I'm severely dyslexic, so I do rely on note takers and interpreters and a lot of translation, so the barriers were always there. 1 or 2 years in, it did become somewhat easier, but there were times when it felt like we were just going round in circles, really.
Doing group work using architectural jargon, getting involved with that was really difficult because I was the only deaf student there and everybody else was hearing. We'd have discussions and I did feel a bit excluded at times, maybe because they felt a bit apprehensive and didn't know what to expect working with a deaf student. I didn't let it bother me, and I just got stuck writing. Communication was okay. When the interpreter wasn't there, I would just write notes down. I did teach the students some architectural signs, such as modelling, the sign for wood, and also the sign for metal. And we all loved working with our hands. It was just lovely. We felt connected, and I just felt like they understood me. And they just felt like they felt comfortable with me. That was the best communication and just blew me away.
When I then went on to do my part 2, I was surprised and delighted to find out that I'd received a budget. So this budget enabled me to book note takers, interpreters. However, often interpreters weren't available. And similarly with the tutors and lecturers, they weren't conscious of what I needed. They didn't think to schedule ahead of time. They didn't think to accommodate me. There were endless last-minute cancellations and postponements. And obviously, it's impossible to organise my booking of interpreters and note takers.
Some lecturers would be added to the timetable during the evenings. I wanted to attend, but I wasn't able to due to informing the interpreters 2 weeks in advance. With only 24 hours notice, I couldn't do that. When I was interested in attending a workshop, I would need to inform the interpreter 1 or 2 weeks in advance. Sometimes the lecturer would make arrangements at the last minute, within just a few days, and I couldn't get an interpreter booked at all.
When I got through part 1, got through part 2 and arrived at part 3, it was incredibly challenging. There was so much written work to do in part 3. Like I said, I'm dyslexic, so it just felt like the barriers were even greater then. Again, I did have a good team of students and tutors around me, and I just needed extra time to prepare. With things like assessments, expert analysis, evaluations, practical exams, I had to prepare literally 8 or 9 months in advance. And with the oral exam, it was extraordinary because I arrived and it seemed that the tutors weren't aware. I mean, it was the worst possible start because I remember arriving and the tutors expecting one person to turn up and really 3 people turned up because I had my interpreters. And I said to them, "Oh, I thought I'd cleared this. I thought you were okay with this." And they said, "Oh, no, it's okay." And I remember during the questions and the answers, they would look at the interpreters, which is fine, but not ideal. I was given extra time, and I just felt like them looking at the interpreters really began to frustrate me. And I remember that day just feeling disabled with the amount of barriers. And I got through it. Unfortunately, the next day I was told that I'd failed. And after 2 years of hard work, that first failure, as it were, really knocked my confidence. It just felt unfair. But yeah, latterly we did a little bit of training with them a week or 2 before, which they were accommodating about, and we taught them a little bit of science and stuff like that, and I did end up passing, but I do regret not doing it at the very beginning, because if I did, maybe I would have passed first time. But yeah, I mean, they claim that I changed the way their system operates for all deaf students to benefit from in future. So going from completing part 3 to working actually as an architect for the subsequent 10 years, when I look back on the part 3 exam process, I mean, a lot of architects will tell you how important they believe communication to be and interaction with people, and I'd proved that I was a good communicator. But the method of communication in which I had to perform my exams was written, and clearly the tutors had missed the point. That's not my communication style. They should have adapted to try and incorporate that, to try and incorporate my capabilities, the resources I had, which wasn't spoken communication, but that's fine. It's British Sign Language. We can use note takers, we can use interpreters to get there. That shouldn't be an issue. When I finally qualified and registered with the ARB, it was great, but it was very difficult for me to find work. I mean, the amount of job applications I sent out, I've lost count of how many I sent out back then. I remember I was finally offered one interview at last. Went to the interview, I felt fairly confident. I thought it had gone well. And the reason they didn't offer me the job was because they said, well, we've got no space to provide interpreters. I was astonished that they'd sent me a letter to say that. I mean, now looking back, I think maybe I should have sued them because it's discrimination, clearly, but to say, well, we've got no space for interpreters, we can't employ you. I did reply angrily and inform them that they'd breached the Equality Act. I noticed that oftentimes what was happening was I was being offered interviews as a tokenistic box-ticking exercise for them to prove that they were following the Equality Act. But they weren't doing it to give me an opportunity. They just wanted me to come, say my piece, and then they could tick their box. I now realise that, at the time, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I was just hopeful for every interview I had to go whether I liked it or not. And I think after 10 years of it, I'd had enough. Just the constant, year after year, barrier after barrier after barrier.
I had never met any deaf architects before like myself. I didn't know that they existed or were practicing. I just thought I was the only deaf architect student just getting on with it. And then one day someone told me, do you know that there's a deaf architect? And I was like, really? Wow, so that's why I decided to contact you, Chris. When we met, we had a good chat and he became a great mentor to me. With your experience at university, you gave me some tips and I was able to apply that for my work, and I achieved that because of you. At the Deaf Architect Front event, it was just fantastic. So many deaf architects. Networking, it was just great. Lovely to see, I couldn't believe it. We'd never had anything like that before, and I think for the newer generation it's more common. I met an architect who'd been practicing for many years, and that was good, but I wanted to encourage young girls from my generation to join the profession.
Hello, my name is Amanpreet. I'm a disability urban strategist. I'm also the founder of Deaf City Hub. My name is Deepa, this is my sign name. I've worked in the arts industry for over 20 years in a variety of roles. At the moment I work for Arts Council England as a theatre relationship manager, but simultaneously, for many years, I've provided access consultancy in theatres, museums, galleries, TV sets and media.
My name is Jake Ash. I'm an economist with around 2 years experience in town planning and 3 years in urban economics, so 5 years altogether.
I'm Jeff McWhinney. I've had a number of different jobs over the years. I was the Chief Executive Officer of the British Deaf Association and a founder of Sign Video.
I'm Misha. I work as a deaf instructor at Blanche Neville School. I'm a freelance BSL translator and also the founder of the Nova Sign app.
My name is Muna. Today I'm not here to tell my story, rather I'll be relaying the story of someone else.
Hi, my name's Paula. My sign name is Paula. And I'm the Artistic Director for Deafney Theatre.
The theatre industry is really archaic. Historically, a lot of buildings were never designed with any thought for deaf or disabled patrons. The UK is one of the oldest theatre cultural centres, with only one theatre building having been built recently. A lot of venues have to try and make adaptations, but are limited by building restrictions, i.e. being listed buildings, or they're reluctant to make changes to their old buildings, preferring to keep a lot of the original buildings exactly the same as they were, rather than modernise them. Due to this, a lot of deaf and disabled people struggle to work in any backstage roles. There might be accessibility issues, no ramp, just stairs or no lift.
The worst spaces are the changing rooms. The changing rooms are often either on the same floor, but quite a way away. They're never the changing room next to the stage. It's always further away, either upstairs or downstairs, depending on the building's layout. And then the stage manager has to hotfoot it all the way down to let the actors know the half an hour call. And then again for the 15-minute call. And then again for the 5-minute call. You know, hearing actors, they receive their calls through a loudspeaker. The stage manager's headset is used to provide them with access. Half-hour call, so they've got it. But for deaf people, I would like to see more theatres, venues, creatives and designers lead on consultation with us. You know, a new theatre was built in central London recently, and without consultation with deaf people, they think about physical need, they think about lifts, wheelchair access, but they don't consider our needs. They haven't consulted with us on anything. It's shocking. The changing rooms remain inaccessible. It's a rarity. It's never.
When we wanted an extension to our home, it was for a number of reasons, but mostly because we had deaf grandchildren. And that meant that we wanted a safe environment, and also the current home was crowded. So we planned on what was a very simple extension, but it wasn't a simple process. All the back and forth for permission was a really negative experience for us. We had a concept of daylight, which as we know is critical for us as deaf people, but that just wasn't understood.
When I initially moved into my flat, there wasn't any safety equipment fitted. They weren't installed until 1 year later. During that time, I experienced real anxiety. I'd have sleepless nights. I lived on my own. My sleep was consistently broken because I'd wake up in distress, worried things in the flat weren't safe and I'd have to check.
When I worked at Frank Barnes School, the plan was to move to a newly built school. Before the move, the architect asked the deaf pupils for their views on what they would like to see in their new school. And this has contributed to how the school looks today. The staff room has glass walls, allowing deaf staff to see each other. The lift in the old building was small and quite dark, and the children were afraid to use it. Now it's all glass. If the lift ever got stuck, we could communicate and offer reassurance through the glass, making it accessible. The corridors don't have sharp corners. They're curved, giving better visibility. The architects took on board the children's ideas, and that has made all the difference.
Recently, there has been much more awareness around what inclusivity and accessibility mean. So I do have great hope that we will see more provision of accessible and more inclusive approaches beginning to be used within their strategies, consultation and events. And I hope that that will bring change for everybody.
Some theatres have still got very old design features around the stage, or the positioning of the set walls mean that you can't see anything from certain seats. Sometimes our seats are so far back from the actual stage, we can't see a thing. And instead we're always adjusting position, hoping that there are spare seats we can grab so we can finally have a decent sightline. It's frustrating because it means that we are still not having an equitable experience compared to hearing people. We need to have some clear guidelines to support theatres to learn because they have no idea about the deaf experience. We need something created via consultancy with deaf people who have shared their experiences. There need to be clear measures they can take so that it's clearly identifiable by venues what is and isn't feasible. There also needs to be more thought in regard to other groups, deaf-blind patrons, for example, not just deaf people.
We wanted windows all down one side, and we had to go back and forth to negotiate that. And in the end, we were told that we needed an occupational therapy report to do this. We contacted an OT and they said this wasn't the case, that in-house access such as doorbells were included, but structural things such as ramps, etc. weren't. But we were told that there was nothing they could do about it and we had to go back to planning. So there's a lot more back and forth. And the frustration was that originally we wanted one build team to do the whole job A to Z. But because we had to do this first, there was a delay. And because of that delay, the cost of materials skyrocketed. So much so it was 50% more than our original estimate. So we ended up suffering.
The bathroom didn't have any detectors in it. The living room and bedroom did, but there wasn't anything in the bathroom. I was told I don't need one in there, but if I was in the bathroom having a shower or a bath, and then something happened in another part of the flat, how would I be alerted to it? I felt at risk in the flat and thought something adverse would happen. The housing association should have ensured all was in order before I moved in, rather than me having to badger them all the time. It got exhausting constantly having to ask for things. All the onus was on me. I'd been trying to get hold of someone for 3 weeks. It was an endless waiting game. They eventually emailed me informing me that they'd booked an appointment, but I had to work on that date so I wouldn't be home. How was I supposed to function in that time? I raised a complaint because 3 weeks of waiting is unacceptable. My sister, who is hearing, called and instantly all was arranged and in progress. They said they would be able to sort it out in around 2 days to a week.
Do most theatres think creatively for deaf people? No, not really. Recently, I went to a new building, a new venue, central London. I was so eager to go along and work collaboratively with these people. They wanted to broaden their audiences to deaf and disabled people, and I was excited. But when I arrived at the venue, the audience and the playing space was in a round. So the stage was in the centre and the audience situated around it. Well, then if you're a deaf audience member, how do you see the actors who are facing the other way, and vice versa? A round isn't suitable for deaf audiences. So I've worked in various venues, and some venues are incredible, but some... I went along to one particular venue which I had to tolerate, and the creative team, stage manager, lighting designer, sound designer, the creative team, they have to kind of sit from a tech desk and look at the action on stage and change the lighting cue, the music cues, dialogue, etc. And then one venue had the tech desk situated so far away they couldn't even see the stage. They had to peer around to see the stage. They provided a monitor, but when they looked at the monitor, it was so degraded they couldn't see the detail. So the stage manager had to physically open a window and kind of perch outside of it, ready to do the cues. Unbelievable. So when you're talking about access and you're thinking about captions or theatre interpreters, the majority of performances I go to, the black box that contains the captions is often situated in the wrong place. Of course, when you book your ticket, you don't know where the caption box is. So I just have to hope that I booked it in the right place and that I'm seated correctly. I mean, there have been times when I've sat and watched performances and captions are situated behind me and I'm kind of turning my head. It's not even in my field of vision. I'd really like it to be like when you watch TV, comfortable, so you could see it in your own field of vision. It's not suitable, but directors don't think about it. They don't think about it until later in the design of their show. They should do it right at the inception, at the start, thinking about where the set design is going to be, where's your caption box going to be, where's your interpreter going to be situated, rather than just complete the design process and then just bung it over there or over there. They have to always think about it first. They're continually putting our needs last.
It's so important to include and welcome deafblind people. They are so often sidelined, left out of any process, and are never thought about. People seem to have the view that they can't possibly enjoy life, but of course they can get involved, just in different ways. If we provide the right services, they can be included with the right support. It's the same for new venues. I've noticed there's a tendency to design them now so they're almost harder surfaced. Warehouse type places, very industrial looking, which is lovely, but the acoustics for hearing aid wearers are awful because there needs to be something soft to absorb some of the sound.
I had to meet a planning officer for a pre-assessment. This is the consultation that you pay for. An interpreter was provided, and to be fair, the Council Social Services provided them, but they had no idea about architectural jargon. I attended with a deaf architect, and we're both using terminology that the interpreter didn't understand and misinterpreted. Therefore, we weren't convincing. And what made it worse is that I live in a conservation area, so all planning permissions have to be carefully worded because they can be interpreted in many ways. And this choice of vocabulary wasn't happening through the interpreter because they weren't aware of architectural jargon. And that was very frustrating because it created this extra barrier. And when you get planning permission, you receive a very lengthy, wordy document that contains conditions. And these are attached that you must adhere to, such as a roof space is not allowed to be walked on, and so on and so forth. Now, how are deaf people to understand these? I'm lucky because I have British Sign Language as my first language and also English. But despite being bilingual, I find a document hard going if it's very jargonistic. So you can imagine a deaf person for whom English isn't that comfortable a language. They might well go ahead with a build, make errors, and need to take it back down again. And who's responsible for that? I'm really grateful for having a deaf architect on board. It was the best thing.
I think if venues had an array of features that had been clearly thought out, we would all feel so welcome, not excluded or sidelined as so often happens. I know society's trying, but we need to think of smarter ways to make change happen quickly. Deaf space can mean different things to different people. So what does that look like? There is some upcoming research by Deaf Connect Australia, who've spent a year conducting a study in relation to this. There are deaf urbanists in America, and we have Chris Laing for Deaf Architecture Fund conducting more research.
I think it's important that deaf space is seen as an emerging, exciting and vital area of research and not just some small niche interest. It's hugely valuable. By making contact and having these conversations, it brings plenty of rich knowledge, research and evidence about making good spaces for the deaf community. It also means deaf people can be brought into the design process, making sure that they understand deaf perspectives and what deaf space looks like. They could propose a design and provide opportunity to feedback, to say, actually, do you know what, it could be improved this way, and here's the supporting evidence. This is how to best meet the deaf community for this. And maybe that will actually improve design and make it inclusive for everybody.
The conceptual framework Deaf Gain doesn't mention deaf space very much. For me, it's a really simple concept that anybody should understand, but when we've been explaining it about natural light uses, we're met with blank stares and a wall of indifference. And when you try and find some sort of supporting documentation, when you look at the Part M building regulations document, it mentions nothing about this. It is a huge barrier in front of us because these are access needs. Our argument must be that when we think about disability spaces, everybody can agree that ramps are good, but changes to natural light are equivalent. That's what we need. There's no difference.
I think it would be beneficial to talk about deaf space and educate deaf children on what they need to consider for their future homes, as well as what they should think about to establish their own business one day. It would be useful to invite them to view an empty space, ask for their thoughts on how to make it deaf-friendly and functional, and share your ideas with them. You could also utilise AI technology to bring their concepts to life in real time. This is part of their future. If they want to set up their own business, they'll need to consider how to make meeting rooms functional and accessible for everyone. Curved walls in corridors, and so on. This is a useful skill set for their future to have.
I'd like to see more deaf people use theatre spaces on a more regular basis, like get together. Deaf people often congregate in pubs, but the theatre has a bar. Why not go there? I think the theatres themselves need to be more open and welcoming. I'd like to see deaf people stay after a show, hang out, chat, talk, but they finish the show and then the environment's too dark, not very well lit, dim. It's not a deaf-friendly space, and so they go off. I want something to kind of make them hang out in the space so it's deaf-friendly.
To be honest, I think for many, deaf architecture is a new concept. While it has been around for some time, it wasn't until I attended your recent event and saw the website launch that I truly learned more about it myself. Before this, I wasn't aware of deaf architecture at all, and hadn't considered deaf space as a formal idea. I think this is because historically, deaf people were the ones expected to adapt to fit into inaccessible spaces. I believe deaf people are no longer willing to accept this. Why should we have to adapt? Why don't you ensure the space is accessible from the outset rather than it being an afterthought? Get it right at the design stage.
I think Deaf City Hub will be a brilliant example for people to look at and think, oh, Let me go there, let me look at the website, let me learn how to do things from beginning to end. They will be able to see examples of best practice by world leaders who have created accessible, inclusive models. The whole process is well thought through with accessibility in it from the start. It's about going to a place without any barriers.
The whole concept of Deaf Space has saved me a lot of money, actually. The reason was that we brought in a deaf consultant to advise us on the layout of our extension, which included the kitchen. So we wanted the classic triangle with the sink and the cooker and the fridge. And in working that out, the consultant advised us that we could swap over the cooking station and the washing station and put a mirror on the wall behind that. I didn't understand, but then it was like a light bulb coming on. And thanks to that consultant, we now have our social events, a cooking station where we can see everybody join in the conversation because it's an open plan kitchen. You can also keep an eye on the kids while you're cooking, which is great. Then when everybody's gone and it's washing up time, you can just do that over on the side. And it really prioritized the socializing in our kitchen space. And without that, we would have been stuck cooking and missing out on all the conversation with our friends and family. So it seems like a small thing, but to try and change that after the fact would actually cost an awful lot of money. So we saved money.
I think we need more consultation. If in the future new theatre buildings are being built, they need to make sure deaf people are included in the conversation, talking about the layout and so on. Big issues for me are I'm deaf, I'm small. I hate going to an old-fashioned theatre where the seating is all on one level, so I'm always stuck looking at the back of someone's head, straining to see. Sometimes the positioning of the captions or even any BSL on stage means I'm constantly trying to see over people. It's just so frustrating, you just can't see. Hearing people have the advantage of listening and therefore have full access. But we need to see everything all the time. There are so many things to consider.
It's really important to make sure that organisations are thinking about accessibility and inclusivity right at the beginning, allowing them to plan their budget, their strategy, etc. early, so they can deliver and meet the needs for everybody. It's a two-way conversation between the deaf community, or any other community, about getting a clear picture of their wants and needs, while at the same time providing an opportunity for them to give ongoing feedback. This gives them a great foundation which, if incorporated early on in the process, right at the beginning of, say, a new project, they can be prepared and plan accordingly.
We brought in a deaf consultant from day one. They picked up all the sort of issues that came up from our imaginings, because we're just lay people. We have no idea about architecture. We just wanted to go ahead with our own ideas, and they were able to give us advice about light, about space, use of corners, safety, all those sorts of things. And doing all that before the building process and the planning process began was critical, I think.
In an ideal world, if I had to do that again, I would have liked that at the time of me viewing and moving in the flat, that the housing association had booked an interpreter rather than me having to rely on my sister. They should have an interpreter there from the word go. Then I could access all the documentation in my language. Deaf people have differing literacy levels. The housing documents were at a level of English that I didn't feel comfortable with, so I wasn't confident in my understanding of them. I wish they would have adapted them to simplified English format. Housing associations, housing officers, housing departments should all know how to interact with deaf people. They can do deaf awareness training. I think they should know how to work with the deaf community so that they can meet our needs and requests. They should communicate with us on email or use an interpreter. In my situation, the burden was put on me to fight my corner, and it made moving in such a tricky and stressful process. I wish they understood my positionality as a deaf person so that I could be supported when I was moving in, getting the right equipment fitted in the way that suited my needs. I've come to realise that as deaf people, there's such a disparity in provisions, and there are deep systemic barriers that we face when dealing with housing associations and companies. I had to fight the system to get what I needed. I wish housing associations would have an open dialogue with the deaf community to learn firsthand what our needs are, what access requirements we have, and talk with us about the layout of properties. It would be nice to have those conversations with interpreters present, so we have the reassurance of smooth communication. They should know how to book an interpreter and how to modify documents to make them accessible for deaf people. If they're going to be sharing information or holding events, book an interpreter so we can access it. I was completely in the dark prior to moving in, and I had to deal with a whole host of issues. I wish that information was readily available to me from the start.
The main challenge is that the majority of consultations are not designed with deaf people in mind from the beginning, which means that oftentimes what will happen is that consultations will include lengthy written text documentation and a person talking providing explanation. This means that if a deaf person attends, there are huge barriers to participation. It's really important at the beginning of a process to make considerations to ensure that people feel they're able to access the event, such as providing BSL interpreters. It's important.
Public consultations are never really accessible for deaf people. One, I don't think many deaf people realise that there is an option to share your opinions, whether it's about design, place, policy, etc. I think there's a bit of education required there, but also the planning team, the policy making team, the local authority, the larger client organisations, all need to be aware that they need to make their consultations fully accessible.
I think the best solution is to fix lighting permanently in changing rooms that alert by flashing all the people in the room to their cues, and also in the toilets, because of course actors need the loo sometimes. They don't want people banging on the door to attend to their needs. So I think the best quality monitors, TV screens are also really, really vital, not only for the stage, but for the stage manager. I mean, some are so degraded and such poor quality because the theatre venues themselves can't afford to upgrade them. But to have the detail on the screen is so vital for us as a deaf company. If it's blurry, we don't know what's going on. So that definitely needs improving. I mean, venues haven't updated their tech like projectors for years. I mean, often as a visiting company, we have to bring our own, and if they don't have them, we have to hire them. And I'm finding that a lot of theatre venues just can't afford to upgrade their kit because the maintenance of the building itself is so exorbitant that, they're having to inflate their tickets. Inflation's going up and the cost of staffing is going up, but equipment becomes an afterthought. But it's vital for us. It's a vital thing to have good quality tech.
My dream is going onto a website, knowing where the captions and BSL interpreter will be straight away, rather than clicking through multiple screens. The information is just there. Upon arrival into the theatre, you obviously have your ticket on your phone, show it to be scanned, but then there's a communication barrier where you see them looking around, pointing everywhere, which is confusing. If a member of staff could sign, we could have that direct visual communication. Same at the bar. If there was a screen to tell us there's 5 minutes, I then wouldn't have to carry anything. Could simply sit down, see the captions, see the interpreter. That would be lovely. Seating on an incline would be perfect for visibility. The lighting to be just bright enough to see everyone, that would be lovely. Once the house lights go down, you just enjoy the show. Once it's finished, I'd actually prefer to be able to order drinks from my seat and have table service. I could order my drinks in advance, avoid awkward communication, or maybe there's an iPad at the bar for orders. We could have a nice post-show chat in a brightly lit, spacious area, as the space is always so cramped. The toilets are easily accessible. Know that every toilet has a normal light, not constantly flickering. Of course, some people are epileptic, so you'd hope that wasn't the case anyway, but the correct lighting can just make us feel a lot safer. That would be my perfect theatre experience.
I've worked in schools for nearly 10 years now, and architecture was rarely ever mentioned. Deaf architecture, even less so. What we did talk about was historical architecture. Tudor homes, what they looked like. The Great Fire of London on Pudding Lane. and the changes to buildings following that event. We also discussed how people might have made homes more deaf-friendly back then, imagining what those adaptations could have looked like. However, there was no mention of deaf architecture or deaf architects. This topic could be incorporated into the deaf studies curriculum. Several units are covered, such as deaf history, communication, technology, identity. Architecture could be included as a 6-week module, specifically focused on deaf architecture, making spaces deaf-friendly, known deaf architects, the deaf website, and related themes. And this could be taught over a term, ensuring that Year 5 or Year 6 students are introduced to architecture at an early age in school.
Personally, I would love to see more deaf architects, more visibility, because if I had seen more of that as I was growing up, maybe that would have inspired me to perhaps become an architect, or just to be more confident within the profession. Rather than trying to navigate the unknown, there'd have been more advice and information available.
Having a deaf consultant on board who is knowledgeable about architecture really helps. They know the regulations, how the system works, how to work with the other stakeholders in the planning process, and that is invaluable.